So to start off with, I suppose the most important and number one question is, can you introduce yourselves and the books that you have written? Shall we start with Amy first, because you're first on my screen?
Yeah, sure. I've got them ready here. So I'm the author of, always do this the wrong way around. I'm not used to having two books yet. Mina and the Undead and Mina and the Slayers, the sequel. So Mina goes to New Orleans to live with her estranged sister, and she starts working in a horror movie mansion. She's loving the spookiness of the city. But then she realizes that people are being murdered in the style of local myths. Her sister is the main suspect, so she has to prove Libby's innocence and figure out what's going on before she becomes a victim of the next mythical killing. And the second one carries on at Halloween and is more murders for Mina to deal with. Only this one, she's working with the police during the day, and then she meets the Slayers of the title. So she's working with them at night, and then the threats kind of get closer and closer, and she's stuck in the middle of all of it.
How difficult is it to explain book 2 without giving too many spoilers for book 1?
I have to tread very carefully when I'm being interviewed about different books. I have to remember which is in each book, which is difficult. People say, "So tell me about book 1." I'm like, where does that end again?
What's right in that one?
Yeah, it's interesting trying to avoid spoiling my own book, especially some of the questions people ask me. I then have to, because I'm thinking on the spot, I have to think on the spot in a way that doesn't reveal too much. I don't know whether I'm getting any better at it. I'll let you know. I don't think I've said anything too terrible yet.
And I'd love to hear, I've just finished reading this the other day. I was actually talking to Amy when I first started reading this, because it had me hooked like 10 pages in. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about Big Bad Me from the wonderful author.
Thank you. And I've just realized I sat down without my book. But it's got a very nice cover, and it's got my characters on the front. You can all visualize it. So my book is Big Bad Me, and it's about two sisters, Evie and Kate. And Evie thinks she's this completely normal teenager, and she has no idea that she's actually a werewolf, and she wakes up in the middle of the night, and Kate has to get up and battle Wolf Evie and put her back to bed and get up in the morning like nothing has happened. So Evie's, for the first 15 years of her life, going through life like everything is completely fine. And she has no idea of all the weirdness until she's attacked by something scary in her house. And Kate has to like pack them off, and they have to go on a supernatural road trip to this little town called Brightside, where they're supposed to lay low from the monster, but also secretly Kate wants to look for their mom who's gone missing, which is another thing she hasn't told Evie about, because you don't necessarily want to stress out a werewolf. But also she's, I think she's the big sister, so she doesn't want to upset her anyway. So Kate's looking for their missing mom, who was last seen in Brightside. Evie starts getting close with the manager of the guest house they're staying in, Kevin, who's a teenager. So he's got a huge interest in Evie's wolfy side. And in the meantime, there's all these supernatural murders occurring where, teenagers are going missing, there's mysterious animal attacks, and they are trying to get to the bottom of that as well. And it's heading towards a bit of a bloodbath, but it's I think, quite sweet. I think it's quite cute for such a gory story, because it's very family centric and very sister focused. And there's a lot of hot chocolate and just sort of hangouts and quips. So it's pretty monstrous, and people do die, but I think it's, when I think of it, I think it's quite like a warm, fuzzy book with death.
It is, you're right.
You are right. It's kind of like, it's a cozy book. Like, yes, there's werewolves, and occasionally people get attacked, but also it is a really cozy book. And I think it is kind of the relationships that are in the book. Both books have sisters in. We have sisters in both Mina and Big Bad Me. I'd love to know what kind of drew you both to write about sisters. Was it always something from the very start of your kind of writing journeys with these stories that you were going to have sisters in them? Because I think it's not something that you see as much in YA, kind of sister relationships, and I loved them. So I'm being nosy. So shall we go with Aislinn this time?
Sure. Yeah. I didn't initially have a sister relationship, brother sister. Sorry, two sisters. I had a brother sister relationship. Initially, Evie had a big brother called Jack, and he was great, but there was just something off about the vibe. And also because I'm a pantser, as I wrote, another kind of brother sister relationship evolved in the story, and I realized I wanted something different. So much as I loved Jack, when I thought about trying to change it up and make it work better, I realized it would be a lot better with two sisters, and they could just have that more empowered girly bonding. And I've got two sisters as well. I've got a brother, and my brother is great. But I've got two sisters, and I wasn't really representing that dynamic in the story. So when I switched to Evie and Kate, and then Kate decided she wanted to narrate part of the story as well. So I then split the narrative, and she became a much bigger part of the story than Jack ever had been. It was definitely the right idea, but no, it wasn't initially what I wanted to do. And I'm really, really glad that I changed it, because I think it works a lot better with it. And I think that the blood and stuff would be a lot harder to deal with if it was if it was any other dynamic. This is what makes it work for me, for sure.
Definitely. I loved reading like both perspectives and how they bounced off each other, and they just made me smile. Like, they might not always make the best decisions for each other, but you can see where they're coming from, and like it's heartwarming in that way, which definitely helps when you're reading about animal attacks and things to get a more cozy vibe from the story. How about you, Amy?
So Mina came pretty early on into the plotting. I had a couple of, like, one false start where the main character wasn't Mina, and I wrote like a page and was like, this is not working, let's try something else. So I thought, well, what can she be called? And I was like, oh, Dracula, let's just name her after that character. And I thought, what parent would explicitly not just use the name Mina because it's cool, but why would she call her Mina specifically after the girl in Dracula who goes through so much? And then I was like, oh, maybe a mum who's really into vampires. So what would she name her other daughter? Elizabeth, after Elizabeth Bathory. And then Libby popped into my head, and Elizabeth did not suit her, so she was Libby. And Libby came with a girlfriend who, as soon as I imagined Libby, I imagined Bella. And it just became really easy then. Like, I just saw the three of them that would become this little group. But I decided that Libby and Mina's relationship would be a bit fragmented because Libby had gone away to college. I needed a reason to get them to New Orleans because I knew they were from Yorkshire. They had to get there. And I decided that Libby would move there for one reason or another. Mina would have to go and visit her and get kind of swept into the excitement of the city. And it just kind of went from there. I think when you get that initial seed, like Aislinn, you try the thing that doesn't work, and then as soon as there's something where it just starts to snowball and you get really excited, you just know. And I don't have sisters, so it was really nice to explore, think about the sibling dynamic I have with my brothers, and kind of just think about what the relationship would be like with these sisters, because their relationship is nothing like the relationship I have with my brothers. So it was interesting to kind of do something familiar but not at the same time.
Yeah, definitely. Obviously both of you have strong supernatural elements to your books. I'd love to know what the inspiration was behind that. I know, especially Amy, you love the supernatural, so
just a tiny little bit, yeah.
a tiny bit.
I can't lie, can I? With the room behind me, it's like, well, here's my Stephen King, my Charlene Harris, point horror. Yeah.
Do you think you were always gonna write something that was supernatural, or do you think like the story just came to you? I think with Amy, we know the answer.
Yes, 100%. Yeah. So when I was about 11, my teacher really loved the fact that I loved writing, loved reading, and he just really wanted me to not read point horror. And I was like, fine, I'll read Stephen King instead. Are you happy now? And he was like, I didn't intend that, but you know, if that's making you happy, it's fine. So I think even from then, I've always been drawn to darker books. I do read really cute, fluffy ones. I loved Heartstopper, absolutely loved it. Loved Pumpkinheads recently. But I'm just drawn to this kind of thriller, mystery, horror feel. So there was always that. I always knew I was going to write that. And a lot of books I've written seem to just vampires creep in there. It didn't start as a vampire book sometimes, and it just becomes a vampire book. This one always was going to be, because it started with New Orleans, and vampires are so ingrained into the history and the legends of the place. And it was the interview, The Vampire Connection, that I was interested in there as well. the fact that you can have fictional vampires and then people who believe in real vampires. I just thought that was really fun. So yeah, and I think the next like 3 or 4 things I want to write at least are supernatural. And I recently wrote a short story for a horror tube anthology, and that was about werewolves, which it was lovely. I'd just finished writing that when I read Aislinn's book. I was like, it turns out I absolutely love werewolves. Like, how dare you be almost as good as vampires in my eyes? Still not quite. I still love vampires the most, but yeah, you definitely won me over, Aislinn. I started to really think I need to read more werewolf stuff after reading yours.
I think that's high praise. That
It is.
that might be the highest praise.
Yeah, we know how much I love vampires, and werewolves to make me question that even for a second is very good.
Oh, thank you.
So how about you? Did you always see yourself writing something supernatural, or was it just this kind of, you had the idea for this kind of story and the werewolves kind of found their way into the story?
So I've always really loved fairy tales, like the original fairy tales. So that's obviously quite supernatural and quite spooky and creepy as well when you get back to the original Grimm's fairy tales. And we had books of them in the house. And I would sit down and I'd read them, and I'd read all the gory stuff about, the original Cinderella, where the ugly sisters like are chopping their toes off and chopping their heels off. So, I've always had a love of the gory where you think it might be quite sweet as well. And I used to get really, really scared of like Freddy Krueger when I was younger. Freddy's New Nightmares was on Sky One, and they would have the ads and he'd pop up. And I got really frightened of him. And my dad decided to cure me of my horror of Freddy Krueger when I was whatever age I was, 7 or 8, by sitting me down to watch V. Because Robert Englund was in V. And Robert Englund played a good alien in V. And so therefore his logic was, well, now you can see he's an actor, he plays nice characters too. So I learned that Freddy Krueger wasn't real, but like weird lizard people could be anywhere. Essentially it. But my dad always seemed to, his style of parenting was an awful lot of introducing me to different elements of horror in order to deal with my fears. And when I was scared of monsters when I was little, he never told me they weren't real because he knew that I wouldn't believe that. And he would also say, well, I can't say for sure. He's a writer too, as it's possibly quite obvious. But he used to talk to me about how to defeat the monsters. Because if I wouldn't believe that there weren't monsters under the bed or, lurking, then at least I would know, okay, if a werewolf attacks, I can do this. I think I was like, a packet of ham or something like that. If a vampire attacks, seeds and holy water kind of thing. And so I always, I guess, have the cute family sort of vibe. Like horror scares me, but it also always made me feel kind of warm and cozy because my dad would use it to make me feel safe as well. Which is funny because he didn't actually write horror stories. But I guess he saw that in me and he didn't want to necessarily discourage it. So I haven't written anything particularly horror-ish until I got to writing Big Bad Me, but I'd always loved reading it and I'd always loved watching horror movies. So when it came to Big Bad Me, I was very, very excited to finally do it. I was always obsessed with Buffy. As I don't think anyone here can really relate to.
No.
Probably an outsider there, yeah.
What's Buffy? Sorry, I don't know if you know what Buffy is.
So I think I was always
right
going towards I was always going towards writing horror stories, but I didn't think that I necessarily would until my little werewolf popped up in my head and was like, "Can I be in your book?" And that's when I picked it up.
Yeah, that's great. Also, I love that style of parenting because when I used to watch horror films when I was smaller, that was how I used to like unscare myself, by like telling myself like ways to get out of the situations. That's how I stopped being scared, because I'd be like, oh well, if that does happen to me, like it's fine because I can do this, this and this. Or like if I was really scared, I used to do the really silly thing of being like, well, in the horror movie everyone had blonde hair and my hair's clearly orange, so I will survive because, so I love that. That's good.
That's brilliant.
Is there, I'd love to know, obviously, when you're writing, authors often research a lot of things. And I know from kind of past conversations that sometimes really interesting things pop up during these research rabbit holes that authors can fall down. So I'd love to ask you both, like, either something that you found really interesting or fun or creepy that you kind of found out while you were like looking for inspiration or ideas for your books. We'll start with Aislinn this time.
So one thing that I found an awful lot of really interesting things out while I was researching. I found out about the fact that Ireland had its own set of werewolves. I can't remember the name now, but they were a lot more self-aware and sentient than not sentient, but like aware of themselves than traditional werewolves would be, and they weren't necessarily bad guys. They were often used to, like, the king would call on them to help defend the kingdom and stuff. So that was kind of cool. One thing I really enjoyed finding out about was I do have vampires in my story, obviously, and I wanted to figure out if I had a teenage vampire, how long, like, how could I have them stay a proper teenager, proper, impulsive teenager rather than just an old soul in a young body. How could I have that happen? So I did a little bit of research into brain chemistry and psychology. There's a book by Robert, I can't remember his name. It's called Behave. And the chapter is called Dude, Where's My Frontal Cortex? And it's all about teenage brain development, and the way that teenagers react, the things that we think make them teenage, how they can be very, very impulsive, but at the same time, really, really responsible. How much more energy it takes, and how teenagers are so passionate about things. It's all to do with, in the way we think we get cynical when we get older, that we don't care quite the same way as we do. When you're 16 and you're going to save the world, and then you turn into you're an adult, and it settles down. And part of that is because of the way the brain connections are made. You react much more with your fight or flight instinct, rather than other aspects of your brain. I'm very lost now. So all of that was so interesting to read. I started off trying to research how vampires would stay teenage, and instead it wound up giving me a really, really good insight into all my teenage characters, and the reasons they would all behave in different ways. So, my characters all think they're being very sensible and rational, and then just do the most ridiculous things. Kate particularly, she's like, no, I've got this, I understand, I'm gonna leave the strongest one of us behind and go face all these bad guys on my own because I'm the big sister and that's what I do. But I was able to get a handle on those characters, so that was probably the most interesting thing that I researched. But there was also researching how long you'd have to microwave blood to get it back to room temperature. And when I say I researched that, I mean I posted the question on Twitter, and within about 5 minutes someone got back to me with an answer. Some complete stranger, no questions asked, was like, oh, I know how to do this actually. I was like, okay. He actually
needed the answer, but also I'm a bit worried that you know it.
He seemed nice. He'd had calculations.
I'm sure he did. They all do at the start. This sounds like the start of a horror movie, doesn't it? Girl puts ad on Twitter, gets reply from guy who seems nice, knows how to heat blood to room temperature.
However, we'll experiment on it together. No, he did not say that.
Oh, I love that. I just love that you like put it out on Twitter and someone instantly
straight away.
Oh.
I've actually thanked him in the acknowledgements.
Oh, dearie me. How about you, Amy? Have you had any Twitter? I don't know if like that's a moment of genius or a scare. I don't know which side I'm falling on.
I mean, one of my friends is a doctor, and I did message her some weird stuff like, Liz, where could you get stabbed and like not die, but where could you stab someone and then die really quickly? How about if you use teeth? And she's like, I'm really glad I know the context for this, is that you're writing a vampire book. So I did thank her in my acknowledgements as well. So that was quite good, learning like different places on the body that you can bleed in different, amounts, from spurting to little trickles of blood. So that was always good. My favorite New Orleans fact is really gruesome. Like, why the tombs are above ground is because the ground is so boggy that when there was a storm, the body bits would just pop up and float around like bone soup. That's quite nice, isn't it?
No.
So tombs above ground. I won't tell you what happens to the bodies in the tombs. They get to oven-like temperatures, but you can imagine it's quite efficient, the decomposition. So I enjoy all of that. If anybody is squeamish, I'll tell you a slightly more heartening story afterwards. So my favorite vampire story, one of them I used in my first book, about the Carter brothers, but there's also a vampire story about a guy called Saint Germain who used to hold dinner parties, think in the 19th century or something like that, maybe early 20th century. And he used to tell people that he remembered all these periods from history that you couldn't possibly have known. And like from thousands of years before, he told them detailed stories. And it transpired that he was a vampire and he'd been drinking blood. And young woman escaped from his home, jumped out the window. Supposedly this is all documented. I don't know how true it is. She revealed him as a vampire and he disappeared. And then in the 1970s and 80s, there was a musician called Richard Chamfrey, who he was a magician, he was kind of an entertainer, and he claimed that he was Saint Germain, as in not that many years ago, that he was an ancient vampire that had lived for thousands of years and remembered all these lives. And I just thought that was really cool that he could brazenly stand up. I don't know whether he believed that he was or whether he was just spinning a tale, but I love the fact that you don't have to make this stuff up. It's just right there. Like, these things are true. Like, a lot of the stuff I put in the book, I'm like, people really told me this in New Orleans. Like, they'll let people say, like, did you make up the idea of people going to like blood bars and drinking blood and giving their blood? I'm like, nope, didn't make it up. People did that in the 90s. I don't know whether some people still do. It was generally more in private residences than in a place that you could actually like get into and there'd be a doorman and stuff like that. But the weirdest and creepiest stuff I just took from actual fact. So yeah, that was probably my favorite thing. Like, all the weird stuff I can include that's real and I didn't make up.
Well, that puts a whole new spin on the book.
I know, there was just, I took you through a journey there, didn't I? So yeah, some visual images that you can probably not get away from. Sorry about that, but
I'm gonna have an interesting dream.
I know,
Just tonight, I think.
All the things that Aislinn and I have said. From like ugly sisters
Gonna
who
have
cut off their toes
werewolves
and
coming at
heels.
me with like sisters I never knew I had, with a vampire. Maybe I'll have a vampire sister. Something's gonna happen.
Stop it, or Ashley and I are going to start taking your ideas. Like,
That's fine. Obviously you both write for YA, and I always love asking what it is about kind of YA that drew you as authors to kind of write for that kind of age group. If it was me, I mean, I can't write. I think it would just be my absolute kind of love for YA. But everyone does it for slightly different reasons. So I'd love to know yours. We'll start with Amy this time.
So I was a blogger before I was an author, and when Twilight came out, it was Twilight who got me into reading YA again. I was just absolutely obsessed with it, and I read it so many times. I read as many books as I could lay my hands on. So Fallen by Lauren Kate, the Hush books by Becca Fitzpatrick, and the Marked books, House of Night by PC and Christine Cast. I did them all, and I still read probably 90% YA just because it's so fast paced. As Aislinn was saying, like, teenage brains and teenage behavior is so interesting because your emotions are heightened, you're figuring out your place in the world and who you are. And I don't know, I think when I think of like the adult issues that I deal with, it's like, I'm going to take my toddler to a play group and like we're paying the bills tonight, and like tonight when I finish this, I'm going to fill in a form about nurseries. Like, that's adult life. And I think being a teenager, there's just so much scope for invention and excitement. And I know you can write exciting adult books. I'm not saying that all adult books are dull. I think the ones based on my life would be dull. But I just think that there's a lot of things that draw me to it as a reader and a writer. I've tried writing other things, and I think I probably will write other things in the future, but so far they've all turned into YA. like the one adult book idea I had. I sent it to my agent just a couple of chapters and she was like, you've written a YA book again. I'm like, yes, I know. I realized this as I was writing it. I thought that it could be adult, but there's ways you can skew it, isn't there? The ages of the characters and the things that they're dealing with. And at the minute, I'm just really interested in the teenage experience and YA books. So that's where I am for the foreseeable future, I think.
That's what we like to hear.
Yeah, and I won't stop writing YA. Even if I write other things, I know that YA is the real passion for me. So I'll always come back to it.
How about you? Do you always see yourself writing YA or kind of experimenting with different ages? Or
Definitely, I think I'll keep writing YA. I tried for a while before I wrote Big Bad Me. In my 20s, I was trying to be Marion Keyes. I thought I should write chick lit. And it just wasn't working. It just was, I just didn't enjoy it because I really, really like reading YA. I like reading some adult books as well, but I think I just couldn't get my head into it the same way. And also I like the fact that genres blur a bit more in YA because it's all, it's all shoved on the one shelf. I think we talked about that before, Amy. And I enjoy the fact that the emotions are heightened, everything is immediate, everything is now. And it's such a period of change because you go from being a kid to being almost an adult really in a really short period of time, and there's never really another stage when that happens. So it is dramatic and it is scary already. And the stakes are, no pun intended or possibly pun intended, stakes are pretty high already, just from the fact that you exist, and all this is happening. And I think I really, really enjoy that. That said, I do quite like writing middle grade as well. So I've been working on a middle grade book, and that's a lot of fun. I'm reading a lot more of that these days because of the age that my kids are at, and they've got some really, really wonderful books. My daughter's read some Ben Davis recently, and I've just heard her laughing out loud. And now she's gone back and she's reading all the series of Unfortunate Event books, and I'm rediscovering my love for those as well. So I do think I might switch then to writing that as well, but I'm not going to stop writing YA. Even if if this is the last YA book I have published, I'm not going to stop writing it. It's always going to be fun to explore.
It won't be.
it won't be.
I can't believe that for a second.
I will not rest until I have another. Thank you very much. Because
Thank you.
it's great. It's
Thanks.
like, and I definitely get what you're saying was kind of like YA can be a very weird, like, because it's an age range technically, but it does strange things to genres and everything when it gets put in the kind of like YA bracket, and I think that just makes things even more fun. Like the amount of things that I've picked up because they do get put kind of like together and shelved together that I wouldn't usually have maybe picked up is amazing. So obviously before we go, I'm gonna have to ask you both if you have any UK YA books that you've read recently or in the past that you just love and would like everyone else to check out. We'll start with you this time, Amy.
Oh, so many. I just want to tell you about my whole room. Obviously Aislinn's book
This
is
one
absolute must. Yeah, I'm going to go through a few very quickly. If you like horror, you need to try Cat Ellis or Don Kurtovich's books. They both terrify and enthrall me all at the same time as people and their books. They're not that terrifying in real life. If you want thrillers, you need to read Catherine Foxfield, Cynthia Murphy. I've just got an early copy of her new book, The Midnight Game, which sounds so good. So
I'm
good.
terrified. I'm not ready.
Well, I've said to my friend we're going to buddy read it in a few days, but I need to build up to it. If you want to read something with a more sci-fi bent, you could try Every Line of You by Naomi Gibson, which is incredibly romantic, pacey sci-fi thriller. Dead Lucky by Andrina Cordani is about some YouTubers, not called YouTubers, they're like their own online platform. One of them is murdered on screen and he held all of their secrets. So they have to try and figure out who killed him before their secrets get out and before they're murdered too. They're the ones off the top of my head, but I'm sure I've missed loads and I'll come off and go, oh, I had like 30 others I could give you, but yeah, they're the top of my head tips.
They are all brilliant books. And I have asked Cynthia. Cynthia says to read the book with some salt. And I will be doing that. So I'm just passing that message on to you, Amy.
Well, I'm slightly concerned. They sent a candle in
Oh
it.
yeah,
like,
no,
what am I warding off with this candle? Like,
I've
that's
hidden
what I
the
want to
candle.
know.
Amy, that candle summons the Midnight Man. Do not light it.
Well, I was like, I didn't read the instructions as I was reviewing, like, reading the blurb. I was like, so Scholastic, am I supposed to like this? Like, while I'm reading?
No, don't, Amy, no.
I'm going to start my own horror novel. Aislinn started one earlier with like creepy people you can contact on the internet. I'm going to like this and see what happens. Okay. If you don't hear from me for a while, you know what happened. I forgot to listen to Charlie and I lit the candle.
No, I saw it and I was like, I've got a feeling that I shouldn't go near that candle. Then I read the instructions and I was like, no, I don't want that candle in my house.
So if you're reading it with salt, it's like salt, like to ward off demons. It's
yeah, apparently I will be fine. Cynthia says I will be fine if I have salt.
And you trust Cynthia to keep
no,
you
not
safe.
really.
You've read Cynthia's books, Charlie.
She could be leading you down a dark path. It's all I've got to go on at this point, though. So I'm gonna have to work.
I'm going to show you the book now. Just show you the cover. I put it on my TBR pile right at the top. This is the new cover.
It's
It's
so
good.
cool. I love the figure in the flame as well.
Yeah, so I have a TBR pile right there, trying to be organized, and this has just thrown everything off because I'm like putting it on there to read next. So sorry, everything else on my pile.
Yeah, I know. I saw it. I opened the box and I was like, oh no.
I saw this from Scholastic and I got really excited and thought, is it? And yes, I was right.
I didn't click, you see. So I just opened it and then I was like, oh, it makes sense why it's a black box now.
See, I'd just seen Cynthia on Saturday and then it arrived on Monday. So she was already in my brain. So yeah, I was expecting it.
I should have known when it was a black, like, box of doom.
Yeah.
Yes, that it would have been Cynthia's
I
book.
can't wait for you to start reading this, Charlie. This is going to be so fun for everyone. I think you should like live stream as you're reading it with a candle next to you and the lights are like flickering over it.
No.
Sorry, Aislinn, we've just derailed the conversation. Did you have
No, that's quite all right. I'm so excited for the Midnight Game. I'm really enjoying listening to this.
So, as we were saying beforehand, is there any UK YA books that you'd love to recommend before we got totally carried away with candles and the Midnight Game?
Well, Amy covered an awful lot of them. They're an awful lot of my favorite books. Aside from that, things like The Eternal Return of Clara Hart by Louise Finch, which I just absolutely adore. It blew my mind when I read it. I haven't read anything like it before, I think. I love time loop stories anyway, but this is such a different take on time loops. And Rebel Skies by Anne Salin as well. It's just wonderful. Girl with No Soul by Morgan Owen, which I sobbed the whole way through that. That just reached in, and when we're talking about teenagers and the reactions and how heightened everything feels. That's one of those books, like the romance in that just feels so, oh my God, I'm gonna die if he doesn't like me back. And it brought me right back to being a teenager. So that is one of those ones that I will just, and I would read again and again and recommend to any teenager. I've just finished 16 Souls by Rosie Talbot, and it's just amazing. And
I'm glad you mentioned that. That was in my head to recommend, and I completely forgot. So thank you, Aislinn. It's really good, isn't it?
It's so good. I love it so much. That's the first book I've read in a while, actually, and I just absolutely devoured it. And now I'm reading the other ones by Fran Hart.
Yes, I really so good as well.
Yeah, I'm loving I'm a little late to spooky season because I didn't get to really read anything in October. We had 2 birthdays here in Halloween as well as it being publication month. So it was but yeah, I'm really loving just being back into reading now and getting all my spooky stories read.
I agree with all of those recommendations. They're all incredible. Yeah, 16 Souls I've read three times.